Welcome back to the Centered in the City podcast. My name is Wade Brill, and I am so glad you are here. Today's solo podcast is going to come live on Halloween, so I thought that would be the perfect time for us to explore the theme of fear. Mwahahaha. Okay, that was me trying to make a scary Dracula voice, if you couldn't tell. So, in today's episode, we're going to explore the powerful emotion of fear, how it shows up and shapes our lives. We often perceive fear as something to avoid, but today we're going to get to know fear a little bit more, make it a little bit more intimate, and understand how fear is such a natural human response. And today, you'll walk away with some more tools and awareness of how to mindfully be in relationship to fear in hopefully a more helpful way. So, we're going to discuss how to recognize fear, embrace it, channel it into growth, resiliency, and how you can support it, making you be more present. So, I hope you settle into this episode with your favorite pumpkin spiced, whatever warm drink, and maybe your favorite Halloween candy bar. And let's get centered. So I was talking to a friend the other day about this meme that you've probably seen floating around where there's a millennial mom, her mother, so the grandmother, and then the child who's maybe like 1.5, walking around. And the grandmother is playing with the kid and says something like, "Oh, be careful." And the millennial mom steps in and goes, "Mom, we don't say be careful. We say, what's your plan here?" And the grandma chimes in, "What do you mean, what's your plan? Do you know what your plan is?" And it's just this fun spoof on how millennial parents are trying to be way more conscious to empower kids and to not shame kids around their emotions, or don't say, "Be careful," or "Don't do that." There's this playful mocking around this kind of parenting. And what I want to point to is just how often fear, as you see little kids learning to walk or explore things, right? Be careful of fire, watch the stairs, don't run into the street. Like, to grow up in this world, we are hopefully parented or raised by people who are helping us learn what's dangerous and what to be cautious of. They're trying to keep us safe. And fear is such this instinctual place of survival, right? Safety, fear. We're taught these things to be aware of them at such young ages in order to survive. So there's this basic instinct of fear that we kind of need to be cautious of. But there's also, as we get older, different types of fears that we start to develop, like fears of the unknown, navigating uncertainty, the fears of failure, the fear of losing control, the fear of being rejected. These are all sorts of emotions and thoughts that we can have that can really drive fear to be really present. And instead of trying to push fear away, push this unpleasant emotion away, which is very normal, today we're going to explore how we can dance with it, how we can be with fear to support us showing up more empowered, more confident, not feeling imprisoned by our life because of fear. This was years ago. I was in one of my coaching training programs, and I remember saying, like, I want to be fearless. And I remember being coached around this with a mentor, and she was like, "You don't want to be fearless. You want fear. Fear is actually really helpful emotion. Fear can be really empowering. Fear can not only be empowering, but it can be protective. It can be motivating. It can feel fun. It can even support a sense of accomplishment." And that really stuck with me because I used to think like, "Oh, I don't want any fear, right? I just want to be like, do everything without second guessing myself, without holding myself back, without letting fear creep in." But it is true. It's like being without fear, first of all, isn't really realistic for most of us unless you're Alex Honnold, who doesn't have an amygdala and is fearless, literally, because he's doesn't have that part of his brain to activate. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, watch Free Solo, the movie. For most of us humans who do have an amygdala in our brain, this is the center where we process fear and strong emotions. And so, this is what gets activated when we experience fight, flight, or flee impulses within our nervous system. I have a very sensitive, I feel like amygdala. I've never gotten a brain scan, but my nervous system, because of how it's been conditioned over the years, and I've really had to work with it and continued to have to work with it, but I feel very hypervigilant. If I'm walking down the street, I'm very conscious and cautious of what is happening around my surroundings. Where is there safety? What do I need to be on guard of? Some of that is probably my New Yorker upbringing. I think a lot of that also comes from seeing scary movies as a really young child. So, thinking of Halloween here, being exposed to some scary movies at a really young age, I think warped my sense of what is out there and what my little brain could have capacity for when I saw these scary movies, like The Time to Kill when I was 6, or The Bone Collector, like some of these things that, like, as such a younger kid, and especially the youngest of 3 siblings, older brother and older sister, getting exposed to the stuff at a young age, I think really did help put my nervous system on edge. So, one, just practicing recognizing when fear shows up for you. Like, notice, how does your body respond to fear, and in what sort of situations tend to create a lot of fear for you? Maybe you're somebody who has a fear of needles, and going and getting a shot or getting your blood drawn is really intense for you. And that could be for many reasons, or maybe you don't know what the exact root of the cause is. Maybe there's a fear of public speaking. Maybe there's a fear of flying or driving. I'm laughing because that is a fear that I've overcome a lot and I'm still overcoming. Other types of fear that can be very present in people's lives are like fear of, will I have enough money for retirement? Fear of getting pregnant, or fear that something might go wrong during pregnancy, or fear of birth. Maybe there's a fear for you of not meeting a goal, or not being in a relationship as you age, or maybe a fear that you're never going to get a new job if you've been in the market for a few years. So there can be all sorts of fears, like in these micro moments, and also these bigger, let's say, adulting problems. And sometimes our fears are not rational. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Sometimes they're very much rational. And it's not about getting rid of our fear, but again, it's about learning how to dance with it, to live with it so that it doesn't imprison us and hold us back. Being diagnosed with cancer at the age of 21 and luckily overcoming it and being healthy 14 plus years later, I still carry with me every day this fear that life is short. It's like this idea that in any moment something can happen that, takes this beautiful life away from us. And that's a real fear. Like, anything can happen, right? And if I really hold on to that and let it be fear, that keeps me really small. But instead, I can look at this as more of a lesson, as a teaching of, wow, I want to live life on purpose. I want to live each day with as much intention and connection to my values and my vision as I can, because life is short, and what a gift this time that I do have is. And so that helps me rest into the areas that I can actually quote unquote control, right? It helps me feel empowered with this fear instead of frozen and disengaged. So this brings me to this second point around how we can dance with fear, is that fear is going to want to grip us. It is going to want to hold us. And we can let it hold us, which is not very fun and not very empowering. Or again, we can learn to work with it by one, what we just practiced, like acknowledging it, noticing how fear feels within our body, what kind of scenarios it shows up in. And as we start to recognize these patterns, we can also start to recognize our thoughts around fear, the grip that fear can hold. Because a lot of the time when we experience fear, whether it's rising in the uncertainty of life, whether it's creating these like fears of rejection, fears of failure, fear of what's going to happen, even as the election is pending, the fear that can come up of what if, what will be, the catastrophizing. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, recognizing the various thinking traps and stories that the mind creates. And I'll link some of the previous podcast episodes where we dive into those a little deeper if you want to check those out. So fear, this emotion, its skill is that it creates these thoughts of worst case scenarios. Again, these what ifs, what will be, catastrophizing, and it can become, again, really paralyzing. So mindfulness can be a really powerful practice for us in relationship to fear, because it allows us to gain awareness of what's happening in the present moment. So if we can slow down our experience and recognize, oh, the sensation of fear is here in my body. I can feel the emotion in my body. Maybe you notice it like a tightening in the stomach, or there's like a nauseous feeling, or your heart racing, or a gripping somewhere. And then also noticing the thoughts. Is your mind going to these worst case scenarios? Then do you notice what happens as your mind goes to these fearful worst case scenarios? Does it start to continue to spiral? Do you start to judge yourself for having those thoughts? Does that then activate maybe some anxiety? When we can bring mindfulness to our present moment experience, when we can bring our attention there, we can get more curious and kind with it. And we can start to then untangle ourselves from our thoughts and our emotions and just see it like a weather pattern happening in this present moment. So mindfulness gives us this opportunity to break the cycle, break the grip that fear can hold on us, and gives us a choice of what to do next. We can continue to listen to the spiral of fear, or we can start to choose differently. So then once we have this awareness, we get to then turn fear into fuel for growth. We get to see fear as this opportunity and signal to invite us to grow or stretch or to take a leap or to challenge some of these thoughts and behaviors that might be keeping us stuck in the fear spiral. So, for instance, my fear of driving. My mind would create these stories, again, these worst case scenario stories, not even just like car crashes, but just like, what if I lose control? What if I don't know what to do? I'm going to feel really like alone and abandoned if I'm driving by myself. And I have, just again, the spiral, the what ifs. And it felt so paralyzing for such a long time. And fear is sometimes not something that we can just like rip the Band-Aid off and go do. Sometimes we have to really take micro baby steps. We have to titrate into the fear, take little steps into facing the fear so that it's not so overwhelming for our nervous system to embrace. And that's something I had an approach I had to do with driving, was learning how to drive in a parking lot. Then it was with somebody in the car. Then it was, learning how to take really simple trips as the main driver and having somebody in the car to help assist. Then it finally was, me taking little trips by myself, trips that I felt comfortable with. Then it was, can I take a driving solo trip to maybe a new destination, going new routes, not knowing what to expect, and then facing that fear, right? And so forth and so on. And even though I've done highways, I'm still working on that. That is to do a highway, especially solo, is like my next layer that I'm still working on. But when I slowed down those moments of getting into the driver's seat, like I remember there was specifically one moment where my husband and I were driving from Seattle to LA, and I was going to try to help with some highway driving. And it was one of the first times that I had been on the highway driving, and I get into the driver's seat. We're pulled off on the exit, and I just started bawling. My body was so scared, was so full of fear that it just started crying and needed to cry and shake it out and release it. And once I did, I was like, okay, I'm able to do this. And I got on the highway and drove for I think an hour and a half, which was also the longest stretch of driving I did. And once I got off the highway and I switched back into the passenger seat, there's this huge, proud feeling of facing a fear, of expanding that comfort zone and embracing what new possibilities are available. Another fear that I'm currently working with is, you know, this might come off controversial, but here in Seattle, there's a big mental health and drug addiction problem. And there's a lot of homeless people on the streets who are on all sorts of things who aren't mentally stable. And Seattle is, a city, but it's not like New York City where there's tons of people walking on all streets and corners and in the train all day, every day. So there's a feeling of a little bit of a, hmm, who's got my back if something scary happens? In New York, I feel very safe, even though there's a lot of people, there's a lot of shit that happens. You still have some sane people by your side to support you. And in Seattle, that's always been something that has felt in this culture that's a little bit more introverted and people don't like to make eye contact. I've always been like, I don't really feel like the person next to me has my back. So, that being said, my spidey senses can go up when I'm on the train, when I'm walking on the street, when I'm in a unpleasant neighborhood where I might not feel like there's a safe haven nearby. And I have to really work on grounding myself, calming my nervous system, relaxing my amygdala, practicing breath work, and work on staying as present as I can so that I'm not letting my mind spiral me out in fear. And sometimes the fear wins. I'm going to be very transparent. Like sometimes I notice like I will go left instead of a right just because like I get a ping. And sometimes that's like, me using my spidey senses, which is a wise thing to listen to, especially as a woman walking alone. However, sometimes I notice that storyline can win. And it is such a practice for me to stay open and curious and not judge the people that are around me. And to be able to trust in the people that are around me, trust that they've got my back, trust that people aren't going to do something maybe unpleasant, like, take out a knife or whip out their wiener or whatever, because that stuff has happened around me before. And, um, and so it is a practice to say, just even though it's happened in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen now. And that practice of staying in the present moment and trying to stay open and not in the grip of fear is a practice. But I face that fear every day when I take the train or when I decide to walk downtown or walk through a kind of unpleasant neighborhood. I want to face that fear because I don't want to feel imprisoned by my fear. So, in this spooky Halloween, I welcome you to grab your journal or take yourself on a walk and think about, what are my current fears right now? What are some of the fears, the beliefs that something dangerous or painful or threatening might happen? And notice what kind of stories you have in your mind around it. How is it holding you back? Have you always wanted to be a stand-up comedian but fear that sense of rejection? Have you wanted to ask somebody out but again fear that place of rejection or what will happen or what if they say yes? So just noticing, where are you keeping yourself small or trapped by your fear? And then maybe explore, like, what does it look like to gently face your fears, to gently stretch outside the comfort zone and expand your capacity of what's possible, knowing that a life without fear is not really a life, that we all humans have different types of fear. It's just about learning, how do we get to work with it? How do we get to be empowered to grow, not held back? And if you are somebody who is noticing there's a lot of fear right now based on the uncertainty of what's going to happen with the election, I welcome you to join me on Sunday, November 3rd for a Let's Chill session. It's a few hours virtually. You can join us from anywhere in the world, where we're going to do some meditation and some walking meditation and some reflection to help calm our nervous systems and help us build capacity to be with the uncertainty, to be with what is, so that we can show up to our lives, our family lives, our work lives, to the polls, feeling more present and open to what will be. This will be an amazing experience for open to all meditators, whether you're very new or have been meditating for a long time. It's donation based. So come one, come all, bring your friends, and let's support all of ourselves, our community, the world, growing more capacity to be with what is. Thanks so much for being here. I would love to hear what resonates with you about this podcast episode. Even share your fears with me if you're open to it, so I can support you. You can reach out to me on Instagram at OneWade or send me a note via the show note link. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. It helps so much get this podcast into other people's hearts, minds, ears. So please take a moment to generously share. And until next time, stay centered.